This is Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky. We are watching two legends locked in battle. Magnus Carlsen against Fabiano Caruana in Game 1 of their match at the 2023 Champions Chess Tour Finals. The stakes could not be higher, and the players making their first move very deliberately. Complete chill, both players with a full complement of 15 minutes on their clock, and a Ruy Lopez on the board. Magnus Carlsen, Castle's kingside. Both players are experts on their respective sides. And Fabiano plays a move that has been very fashionable. We skip ahead a little bit to the middle game. This was an Archangel, and we get to the heat of the middle game as Magnus Carlsen has traded on G6 and jumped into E4 with his knight. Now notice the center. Magnus has those pawns on D4 and E5. He's got tremendous pressure on Fabiano's D6 pawn. Fabiano leaves that pawn. Magnus says, give me the D6 pawn. What is Fabiano cooking up? Is there a capture on H3? The G2 pawn is overloaded, and there it is. Bishop takes H3. The counter blow cooked up by Fabiano Caruana. White's king is now shattered. G takes H3, and look at the pawn cover around White's king. The rook jumps into F3, but Magnus, he fianchettos his queen. The rook is under fire. The G6 pawn is hanging, and let's not forget about the C6 pawn, which is also hanging, but knight takes E3, and Fabi remains on top. Which piece will Magnus Carlsen take? He takes the rook. Fabi takes the rook on D1. Complete liquidation. And what do we have on the board? We have a knight versus bishop situation. The knight on D6 looks amazing, but Fabiano says, get out of D6. He brings his bishop back to C7. The C6 pawn can be captured. It is captured. Magnus Carlsen with connected passers in the center. Caruana eliminates the knight on D6. The one big thing to watch out if you're Magnus is the king on G1. Black does have that check on G5 in his pocket. Magnus Carlsen, what a move, throws in a check on D5, and only now does he recapture on D6. We skip ahead once again. Magnus Carlsen now has a passed pawn on D5, but Caruana has been able to restore material equality, and he's got a beautiful blockading rook on D6. Magnus, a little bit frustrated. He let that advantage slip. He's got 7 seconds on his clock, and he brings his king back to F1 to relative safety. Now, probably White is the one playing for a win, but things could change very, very quickly. If Magnus Carlsen overpresses here, the weakness of his king could eventually make its presence felt. Fabi is also up on the clock. He's got 35 seconds. That's very significant. If this game turns wild, 3 seconds for Magnus. Rook to C3. No passeron. That queen is not allowed to infiltrate White's ranks. The rook comes back to D3. An implicit draw for, let's see if Fabiano will continue to repeat moves with Queen C7. But the temptation for Fabi has to be to play for a win here. He's got the extra 20 seconds, and he declines the repetition. Queen D2, and Magnus, he brings his king toward the center. What a brazen move. The king and the queen are now aligned. You have to be careful about a rook appearing on the e-file. Carlsen drops his queen back to D4. Obviously, a queen trade is out of the question for Black. Magnus, king to D2. He continues to cycle his king from the king side to the queen side, which is a relatively safer area of the board. King to C2, and the king has fully completed its daring walk across the center. Rook to F6. Fabi switches from the D file to the F file. F3 by Magnus, sacrificing the pawn, but capturing it would have allowed White's D pawn to run forward after the trade. Fabi has to try to keep both the queen and the rook on the board in order to keep White's passed pawn at bay. King A2 by Magnus Carlsen. Now White's king is relatively safe, but if Black plays B4, that king will be reopened once again, and that is exactly what Fabi does. B4, and a favorable trade for Black as the rook trampolines from side to side, and Magnus once again with mere seconds on his clock as he drops his queen back to D2. Now the king on A2 is no longer fully safe. The pawn on B2 is very vulnerable. Black could double on the B file. Magnus, very methodically, very deliberately, parrying all of Fabi's threats. Rook to D4 on the board. 10 seconds now for Fabiano. The clock time has equalized. Fabi sends his rook forward to B3. It goes, attacking the F3 pawn. Magnus with 5 seconds. What is he going to do? Drops the rook back to D3. Both sides kind of repeating moves, trying to gain a little bit of time. Magnus is not opposed to a draw. Look at Black's king and how safe it is in a time scramble. The side with a safer king usually has the practical advantage. H4, H5. The king side is frozen. Magnus trying to find something to do. 2 seconds on the clock as he lifts his queen up to D3. Down goes Fabi's rook. White's queen now drops back to D1, and the B2 pawn is more vulnerable than ever. Fabi chooses a great moment to double on the B file, and he takes on F3. Magnus could not play d6 there because of a check on b3. He has to waste a move. And now Fabi has captured the pawn on f3. The attack continues. He blockades the d pawn, now with his queen. Hesitation there for Magnus as he moves the queen up to c6. Again, the queen trade out of the question. In comes Black's queen. Queen h2 on the board. Fabi could capture another pawn, and he does. Queen takes h4, and he's threatening a fork on c4. Magnus just doesn't have time to push that d pawn up to d6. Now 3 seconds for Fabi. Queen g3 on the board. Will Magnus push that pawn? No. He brings his queen back, trying to find the right opportunity. But for some reason, Caruana gave away the a pawn. There was no reason to do that. Now Magnus has serious chances. Queen to d6. That queen has been on d6 so many times. Fabi still not allowing the d pawn to move forward. Rook a4 by Carlsen. The rook drops back to f5. If Fabi can win the d5 pawn, he basically wins the game. He's got 3 passed pawns on the other side of the board, and those pawns will be set in motion. b4 by Carlsen. The king trying to use the pawns as an umbrella. Queen f6. An excellent move by Caruana. Rook f3 is now a huge threat. That would win the queen. Magnus moves the queen out of the line of fire. A check by Fabi, and the rook blocks. Rook d3. The rook trade once again favorable for white. Rook to f2, and finally Magnus Carlsen, he pushes the pawn to d6, but is his king going to get mated? There's a check on b2. The king has to run forward. King a4. Another check, and the king hides behind the pawn, zigzags its way to b5. Caruana with 7 seconds. Can he find a checkmate here? And the queen moves back to a8. In comes Magnus's pawn. Rook f5 check. King b6. There has to be checkmate here. But can Fabi find it with 9 seconds on the clock? Rook f6 check. Oh! Rook f6 check is mate. Rook f6 check should win the game here. And he plays it. Can Carlsen go king to c7? He now has 30 seconds on his clock. I think king c7 might be the only move. Carlsen finally slows down. He calculates the variations. And I think king c7 is the best practical attempt. I don't quite see the checkmate after king to c7. Maybe queen a7 check. Fabi taking the time that Magnus is spending, trying to calculate the win. King c5. Now Caruana can win the queen, but that might not be the best thing he can do. Queen c6 check, and rook f4 was winning on the spot. Caruana could have won the game on the spot with a check on c6 with the queen. And he could have won white's queen without giving up the rook. Now, it's far from easy. The d7 pawn has to be blockaded. Now the b pawn rumbles forward. It's a 3-result game. 2 seconds for Fabi. A check on c7. Panic. He goes back to d8. Magnus Carlsen using his rook and using his pawns, trying to dominate the queen. Now, b6 would be a huge mistake. Magnus Carlsen moves his king out to a4. 3 seconds for Fabi. Uses his own pawn. Here comes Magnus. b6. You can't take that pawn. 2 seconds. h3. A blunder. He gives the pawn away with check. Magnus Carlsen is going to win. b7. King e7. Fabi holding on. Here comes Magnus's king. Now Black's queen cannot move. It cannot move because white promotes one pawn and then white promotes the other pawn. Here comes white's king. Rook e3 check, and rook e8 is threatened. Rook e3 check. Oh my goodness. Magnus Carlsen might do the impossible here. The rook from d3 is going to deliver a check to the black king. Fabi has to play king f7 there in order to allow a check on f6, and that's a huge blunder. Don't release it. He does. He blunders rook e8, and Fabi can't believe it. King f7 would have held a draw. It would have left the f6 square for the queen. Fabiano Caruana has blundered. Magnus Carlsen has pulled off the unimaginable, an incredible turnaround victory in Game 1 of the Carlsen-Caruana match at the 2023 CCT Finals. Thank you so much for watching this breathtaking display, and I'll see you in a subsequent video.